Καλησπέρα σε όλους, καλώς ήρθατε. Καλώς ήρθατε στην πρώτη εκδήλωση των διαλόγων για τη νέα χρονιά. Οι διάλογοι είναι μια νέα πρωτοβουλία του Ιδρύματος Σταύρος Niarchos, η οποία ξεκίνησε το Νοέμβριο του περασμένου χρόνου. Πρόκειται για μια προσπάθεια να αναδείξουμε ανθρώπους που με το έργο τους εμπνέουν και ευελπιστούμε να μπορέσουμε να δημιουργήσουμε μια πλατφόρμα για την ανταλλαγή ιδεών. Η σημασία που δίνει το Ίδρυμα Σταύρος Niarchos στην προαγωγή του ανοιχτού διαλόγου χωρίς περιορισμούς και ο κομβικός ρόλος που έχει ο ανοιχτός διάλογος για την ανάπτυξη μιας δημοκρατίας αποτέλεσαν και την αφορμή του θέματος της σημερινής συζήτησης. Η λειτουργία, η απρόσκοπτη λειτουργία του τύπου και οι προκλήσεις που αντιμετωπίζει η σύγχρονη δημοσιογραφία είναι κάτι το οποίο αφορά όλους μας, δημοσιογράφους και εμείς. Το Ίδρυμα Σταύρος Niarchos προσπαθεί να υποστηρίζει πρωτοβουλίες οι οποίες υπερασπίζουν και προάγουν τη δημοσιογραφία τόσο στην Ελλάδα όσο και αλλά και την πρόθεση του
In the context of our charitable work, we have supported programs such as the Columbia School of Journalism Scholarship Program, which offers scholarships and allows Greek journalists to go there to follow intense programs. And we're lucky because we have with us some of the first SNF fellows from this program, and they will talk to us about their experience later on in the day. Now, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation also supports the practicum at CSIS. This is based in Washington, and since we are on the other side of the Atlantic, we also have announced a grant of the order of 40 million for the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Agora Institute in Baltimore at the Johns Hopkins University. This is an interdisciplinary center which promotes open democratic dialogue, public dialogue, and it encourages the participation, the civic engagement, rather, of people. In order for us to talk about the challenges and opportunities facing modern journalism in Greece, we have Sofia Papayanu, the journalist, Aris Hadjistefanu, a journalist, and he will be talking to us via Skype, as well as Kostas Zafiropoulos, as well as a professor at the Aristotle University, Nikos Panagiotou, and we also have somebody, Mr. Valentinos Tsekas from Macedonia University. We will be talking to him via Skype, and Mrs. Bousdoukou will be moderating the discussion. Before we begin, we'd like to show you a video that we have prepared, and here we have some of the first SNF fellows from the Stavros Niarchos Scholarship Program. These are the fellows who went to the Graduate School of Journalism in Columbia for their summer study. This is the video. The first journalists have returned from New York and tell us their experience. I participated in the video journalism workshop of Columbia with a scholarship from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. This was a unique experience. It was unprecedented. As soon as I received the acceptance mail from the university, I thought that they were telling me a lie. I thought that they were playing a prank on me. Columbia, for a journalist, is a temple. So what we learned in the video journalism workshop is how to find the right story for video. So the journalist tries to find new means, new tools. We learned how to use cinematic techniques in order to cover a news story, how to tell a story which are based on reality, on facts. So in this way, we were able to learn how to attract our audience, which is constantly being bombarded with information, and how to raise awareness on various issues. Coming back from New York, I took a lot of things back with me, and I tried to implement all this in practice, both academically and professionally. I work in a TV show, so all these tools are now being used by me. But at the same time, I decided to do a master's degree on documentary production Right now, I'm working with a group of actors with disabilities. I'm very close to them. I record their rehearsals on video, and I'd like this to become a larger project in the future, a bigger one, maybe even a documentary film. So the Stavros Niarchos Foundation scholarship covers tuition fees, living expenses, and the tickets to and from New York. Elvira Krithari attended the investigative journalism program. My name is Elvira Krithari. I'm a journalist, and this summer I attended the investigative journalism workshop at Columbia University. I think it's a great opportunity for journalists to attend this program, not just people who are passionate for investigative journalism, but for all journalists who want to develop the way they work and to improve their way they work. In Columbia, we taught about investigative journalism and how it's done in the United States. This means that we followed money trails, we used data mining tools, we learned how to do research and investigation, and even ways to protect ourselves in war zones. However, what I remember most clearly is that investigative journalism is not just a methodology. What it can do is cover a gap in information, but also shake up power structures. It cannot just be based on the viral aspect of social media. It serves the public interest. In the program, I was able to meet not just foreign colleagues, but also the other Greek SNF fellows. So while they're out there practicing journalism, my concerns about the future of journalism in Greece have decreased. So the selection of fellows is carried out by Columbia University. Yannis Antipas attended the lead program. My name is Yannis Antipas. I'm a correspondent in Brussels. I was one of the SNF fellows at Columbia University, and I attended the lead program, the data program. This was a very intense program. It required a lot of work, sometimes even more than 12 hours a day. But what is impressive is that the way teachers teach, professors teach there, but also because the program was designed in a very creative way, we were able to cover a lot of ground, and we covered a lot of programs which normally would have required more time to be taught. I would recommend this program to any journalist who would like to do something intense in order to differentiate himself from other journalists and to have new tools to cover a story, to transmit information. I would also recommend it because it is a fantastic new way to investigate, analyze, and visualize, i.e. to make graphs which we can use to convey a piece of news and to make it simpler for the reader and more easy to understand. For me, it was a great advantage because I'm one of the few that can work with a huge amount of data, and I can use programming languages in order to investigate a story and visualize it. And I think this is something that I've seen because I'm working close with foreign press. I'm in Brussels. There's a great need there for data journalists, and this actually gave me a big push in my career. So journalism has changed for me a lot because I see things I didn't see before. When I hear a piece of news, I understand that possibly there's a huge amount of data behind it which we can analyze in order to highlight a different aspect of the story which normally we would not have been able to show. So applications are open for the summer program.
Proud to be the home of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Professional Education in Journalism Scholarship Program. This is an opportunity for journalists who are residents of Greece to come to Columbia University for summer study. While they're here, they'll acquire new skills and help advance their careers. They'll meet colleagues from around the world who are doing the same thing, and they'll return home to share what they've learned. We see this cohort of journalists as well positioned to be the future leaders of journalism in Greece.
Well, I'd like to bid you a good afternoon also. Welcome. It is, in fact, very encouraging indeed that we have so many people here attending this, and as we were watching the video, we saw more and more people have been entering into the auditorium. I'd like to welcome Sofia Babayano. She's with us today. I'd like, in turn, to welcome our speakers, Professor Nikos Panagiotou, and he's an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Mass Media at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Kostas Zafiropoulos, who's a journalist, and he's in investigative journalism. I think it's very important to note this because I think that in the course of our discussion we'll be able to showcase this, whether we need to add investigative to journalism or whether it goes, in fact, together. And we've also got with us Aris Hadjistefano and with Valentinos Tsekos. Valentinos is a student, and perhaps a lot of you know him because we see that we have had him in quite a few mass media because he has tried to do a lot in order to be able to remedy the issue of fake news. And this is something that we're going to talk about during the dialogue to see whether this is a sign of the times or whether we've got more tools in hand to tackle fake news. We'll see how we can actually stem and curb the transmission. So, Nikos, Professor, as we like to speak face-to-face, I think that I can address you as Nikos. Is that not true? So we can keep it for this discussion also. But let's look at the crisis. It's the main thing that ails journalism. It is something that we discuss at length, and I think this has made most of us suspicious when we hear something, when we read something, and even when something actually is heard against somebody, and we see how it targets that person. So I think we have to see what happens with who signs off on an article and what happens in terms of investigation and of substantiation. So this is our monthly meeting of January called Dialogues, and this is something that has been launched in November by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, and here we're in the Centre for Culture of Stavros Niarchos. So this is a dialogue not only for the speakers, but it's open to the audience. We're interested in everybody being engaged. We're interested in your questions and your thoughts. And this is also true through the internet. So I'd like to welcome all those who are following through the live streaming, and you can, in fact, whether you're watching from the internet or you're physically attending, you can send your questions to snf.org questions, and we are here in order to be able to address the questions that we receive from you. I will actually hand over to the speakers and to the audience. And this is a question that is of interest to us all because we refer to the quality of public debate and the responsibilities that all who actually can speak out publicly have. Let me start with this table, and please explain to us what it reflects, and let us also consider whether we are in fact attached or not to the various institutions. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for the initiative and for the initiative to organise this very important event. I'd also like to thank the audience for honouring us with their presence and all the speakers. And I must say that we have had a very interesting discussion already, and it's something that we'd like to share with you. So we have actually decided to kick off with this table because we would like to, in fact, showcase a very important issue. And this has to do with the very title of this event today, that the crisis in journalism does not only pertain to the mass media. Actually, it is something that affects the very core of our society, of democracy, but also it impacts the other institutions. So on this table, we have the figures collected by Kappa Research, and it shows that there is, in fact, an exacerbation of most of the trust indicators towards the various institutions that support our society. So we would like this discussion today to be seen as a debate that's not within the walls of journalism. It is, in fact, a discussion that has to do with all of society, all of its institutions, and what can we actually see here in this table? That there is a great loss of trust towards the institutions, especially those that are considered to belong to the state, local government, the government, the parliament, political parties, mass media. And we see that there is an ever-reducing trust towards these institutions. And this indicates that there is still a crisis within society. It is a crisis that has to do with representation and trust. And this undermines, to a great extent, any attempt of recovery that we are attempting in the last few years. So I think we could go to the next topics. Yes, we're going to actually hear a first comment from all in order to actually have the first comment from all speakers about this crisis that we see in trust. It's something that we've all accepted and admitted, and I think that we should actually see how we can proceed individually and as a society. Well, I consider that this crisis exists. We've been talking about it for years, but I don't think it affects Greece only. I think there's a crisis in institutions abroad also. It is, in fact, very widespread. We've seen what has happened in the US with the election of Trump's and how Trump played with the media because he knew that there was, in fact, a lack of trust in the media, and he actually awarded the worst journalists, and he put the New York Times first. I know that a lot of politicians have played on this, and Trump is, in fact, a result of this crisis in institutions. I'm sorry that journalism has been placed so low, and I think it's journalists also who have a share of the blame, but I think that the public has to decide what type of journalism it wants. I'd like to bid you a good evening also, and we see that it is an all-time low for journalism, and I think that we have seen a survey in the Pew Institute, and it shows this in 38 countries, that 75% of the public in these 38 countries, and they show that they do not believe that the mass media should actually support a specific political party. And I think this is the reason that, or one of the reasons that we have, in fact, this loss of trust in Greece. I think it's a matter of educating the public also, and not only journalism. But I think we have to look at how the mass media is financed, are financed, and I think this is one of the most vital matters. And we have to look at the internet and whether this is, in fact, the new field of action, if you permit me to say this. And we see that this is a divisive issue. We have two theories, whether we should have the political and the party politics in journalism and what tools can be used. Now, Aris, I would like to change the ambience a bit and say that I think that it is good to see that we have ranked so low, and I'm referring to the mass media in Greece, and I think it would be very troubling to see if the public was pleased with the level of journalism. I think we can say the same for other countries, but I think that this is a problem that we have on a greater scale in Greece. It is not only in the crisis. We see that we have mass media that were never profitable since the restoration of democracy, but we see that they expressed very few families, and we considered these to be oligarchs, and they had non-profitable mass media that they used in order to put the pressure on various governments. With the crisis, we see that they have waned a bit because we have new players and new actors in the market, because we have the banks, because we have had, in fact, the collapse of the advertising market. They control the mass media to a great extent. And with this backdrop, we have this reaction by the public. And we know that there is a general tendency for the good to go down with the bad, but I think that we have to focus on the backdrop, both socially and economically, of the crisis. Valentinos, in order to come to you now, you have been monitoring also what is happening on the internet. I would like to ask whether we can actually see through your eyes, the eyes of a person who likes to read informatics and knows what is going to be shared and what is going to go viral. So who decides what is going to be shared? Because, okay, I might well share, but who decides what will go viral and who decides what will appear time and again, irrespective of whether I have befriended somebody or not? And we see that Facebook said that this is a trend that will wane in the time to come. What do you believe? I would like to echo what was said with respect by the previous speakers, rather. And I would like to say that in this chaos, young people don't know what to read. At least that's how I see it. And I think that we do not have the ability to discern what is qualitative journalism. And young people tend to devour what Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram provides. So what is lacking both in Greece and abroad is media literacy. So being able to assimilate what we read. And I don't know if there's an answer, but let us take a deeper look into the causes. You said it's not a sign of the times. It is, in fact, something that we have observed through time, and we have to go quite far back in time to find the roots of the problem. And you also said that it's a global problem, and there are different facets, and it exists in various countries to varying degrees. But let's look at the causes, if we may. Is it the integral relationship with the political world? Is it the sponsorship and the financing? What are, in fact, the classifications of the causes? And I think that we will be able to see further figures that are of exceptional quality by Nikos. Now, let us see who is to blame for this confused landscape.
So, first of all, I believe, we have to ask whether the journalists are to blame. And I'm not going to talk about Greece only, because this is not a Greek phenomenon. We tend to keep saying bad things about Greece and the Greek journalists, but we've seen, by way of example, that this is a global phenomenon. We had the British with the Brexit. They hadn't predicted the Brexit the way it turned out. In the US, they didn't expect this rise of Trump. They didn't predict it. I don't need to go into further detail. So I think that there is an issue here, meaning that media are controlled by politicians and by businessmen. This is something we've known for a long time now, and sometimes I feel very bad as a journalist when I hear politicians in parliament talking about journalists and I saying that I heard this in this TV channel at this radio station, and I'm very upset when I hear this. This is not a current phenomenon. It happened in the past in Greece as well. Whoever has read the memoirs of Mitsotakis and Mitsotakis Konstantinos, the deceased politician, talked about how media outlets are controlled. So somebody, however, needs to finance the media. And even though we exercise criticism on Greek television, despite the fact that people no longer watch TV the way they used to, I think that we're living in very promising times, i.e. that whoever wants to, and there are many young journalists amongst you, can set up their own media. They can start taking photos, they can start making a video and upload it on the internet. And let's not forget that by 2020 it is expected that 2/3 of journalism globally will be mobile. They'll be via our phones, our smartphones or iPhones. So since we all have phones, we can actually become journalists ourselves. So I think it's a very promising era. It's not necessarily all bad. And this is something that hasn't been answered worldwide. And I said it's not Greek. Who will finance mobile journalism? Meaning you can start out, you can set out. Just a couple of days ago, a Canadian site was given an award. This was an American woman who went to Canada. Now she has become a very good investigative journalist, and she is fighting Google and Facebook, and she's been able to get some awards. And what we do as consumers, news consumers, is we have to decide who do you want to pay for the news, because somebody has to pay in order for you to have something to read. This is not an easy question. It's not easy to answer this question. Sometimes some charitable foundations have started financing journalistic sites. And I think that this is a lovely outlet for all of us. And I'm very happy that there is this possibility, because we as journalists sometimes feel trapped in this dire crisis. And we know that some subjects cannot be aired for many reasons, financial reasons, one of them, but also because they don't sell news. These news don't sell. And this is something based on personal experience. I know what sells on TV and what doesn't, and I can actually prove it to you due to the fact that some shows on TV based on investigative journalists are actually aired at midnight or in the wee hours of the morning. I think this says it all, meaning if somebody wants to watch something that is based on investigative journalism on TV and whether wants to watch something like that, you have to stay up late. So we shake our head with Anna and other journalists who know what TV is all about, because we know the problems facing TV. Sometimes we don't have a camera to go out and report on an issue, but I don't want to grumble, so I'll stop. I'm going to play the devil's advocate, and I like doing that. I partly disagree with Aris and Sophia. I disagree with Aris. Well, I'm really concerned about the credibility of the mass media, because we see the end of the list. If you bring to us this list, we'll see where credibility is high, and that's in the army and in the church. So these are the institutions we trust a lot. No offense, of course. So let's see what we hold high and what we don't believe as being credible. Now, citizen journalism. Let's try to engage in an active discussion, not a flat discussion. It's very problematic to say that each of us will go out with a camera and become a journalist. That's not easy. Citizen journalism may have been a good idea abroad, and it's something that has become very trendy in the last year. But even if I go out with my laptop and my camera and generate some content, this doesn't mean that I'll be able to generate an income. So let me talk about financing models. There are three basic models. One is the traditional one, the one we experience, meaning businessmen who now Well, these are businessmen who have been involved in many different activities. Each of them, for example, is involved in gambling, has a football team, and have links to political parties. This is one model of businessmen, but we also have the oligarchs. In the past, we had the traditional editors, newspaper editors. That's the second model. And the third model is the one I have, for example, EFSIN, which is a cooperative model. There are many advantages and some disadvantages, which I won't go into detail about right now. And there's a ceiling, a cap as to what one can produce, but there isn't the same dependence. So the third model is the one that we saw in New York, those of us who went to the School of Journalism of Columbia. So we're talking about investigative journalism, which has donations, there's sponsors, and there's an asterisk, because every time you have to understand why somebody is financing you, and you have to look into it. And then, I don't want to tire you, I'm going to bring this to a close. In a recent trip to Germany, I went to visit Touch, a historic newspaper in Berlin. If you look at the number of subscribers they have on an annual basis, and how the citizens themselves contribute to the financing of the journalistic content of the newspaper, you'll understand the big difference between this newspaper and what's happening in Greece. I don't know how many of you buy newspapers. For example, it would be good to ask this question. So, how many of you buy newspapers every day? Every day. How many of you buy a newspaper every day? Or maybe on the weekend? How many students buy a newspaper once a week? Raise your hand. These are journalistic students, okay? Right. So if there is no subscriber culture in Greece, just like we download films and series we consume, we also consume news content and journalistic content, and then we actually blame all journalists indiscriminately. But it's very difficult for us to contribute to the process. And I think this plays a role. If you don't contribute to the journalistic content, then the businessmen will do so. And of course, they do so with their own interest in mind. I would like to talk about the possibility for you to participate via the internet, meaning snf.org/live, snf.org questions. That's where we accept questions. A comment has come. It's not really a question, because this was already touched upon by Sophia, i.e. whether there should be, we should look at the ethos of the journalist, some self-criticism, and maybe all the other responsibilities and the way in which things take shape. And we talked earlier about the financing model. This was something touched upon by Kostas, and the responsibility of the public, of the audience. But I'd also like to involve in the discussion, because this is something you know well, the question as to how easy it is for a journalist, for XYZ reason, to attempt to make his or her own step forward and to have a view on the internet, or an independent view on the internet. Well, these are things that are connected to what was mentioned by Sophia and Kostas as to how easy it is to become a citizen journalist. And I can actually tell you a story from my own website, which I started managing more professionally just before the referendum in Greece. So what I realized during the days of the referendum is, because everybody was in front of a screen of a television or a laptop, my site was crashing every few hours, because I had a server of €100 somewhere in the US. So when you had 1,000 people watching, it crashed, and then I had no presence on the internet whatsoever. This means that I had to immediately pay 500, 600, or even €1,000 for a server without calculating the plugin and the widgets which make the site faster. A faster site actually means that Google will show you higher when one does the search. And if you're in the top 3 positions, that's important, because otherwise, if you're not on the first page, you don't exist. And of course, we haven't talked about about the problems facing journalism from large platforms like Google and Facebook and the net neutrality. And let me put it simplistically, the providers will be able to give access priority to those who pay, meaning my site will cease to exist because CNN will be able to offer more money and have a bigger bandwidth, so the algorithm of Google will give it priority over my site. So, of course, we know that technology offers huge possibilities, but even in social media, what we saw was a repeat of the balance we had in the big mass media. The mainstream media remained dominant on the internet as well, with some exceptions, and the picture did not change as much as we would have expected. Now, in relation to financing now, and this would be my final note, it's very important that Kostas talked about the three types of financing. That's quite right. But I think that we need to look at it more philosophically, i.e., what do we consider to be news and information? If we see it as a product, as a commodity, and we see it in a free market model, we'll always end up with situations like the one we have today. It was always a problematic model, and at a time of crisis, when there's very little money and just a few big players on the market. I talked about the banks previously, but it's not just the banks. So the news, the commodity of news will be controlled. And I'd like to add another thing. If news is not a commodity, is it a public good? And if it's a public good, is it the responsibility of the state, of international organizations to offer it for free to citizens? How can this happen? For example, some years ago in France, there were some proposals that the state finance news. So the first reaction here was, and this is quite reasonable, if the state offers the money, it will try to control content as well. So what I said is that we can give the money to French citizens so that they can buy any newspaper they like or that they can subscribe to any media they wish. I think that this is a key point. This has to do with how we define information, how news, and then we can see which financing model must be followed in that case. And I believe that we can bring about significant changes. And here we have another important subject. I don't want to elaborate on it right now, about the platforms like Google, Facebook, Twitter, which acquire by nature, and it can't be otherwise, a monopoly character. And we know that Facebook is a bit like the water supply network. You don't want to have 4 different water pipes for competition purposes. There's only going to be one main supply network. So the question is, who actually controls the network, which is the other side of the coin, i.e., who finances the news? And Valentinos now. Valentinos, would you like to step in? Would you like to intervene? Yes. I personally believe that journalism is thriving internally, but extraneous factors don't let this creative boom to materialize. The problem, of course, we talked about the 3 models, the 3 revenue models, but I think we can create from scratch a 4th model, which will be much better than the 3, because being 20 years old, I have actually been before subscription models, paywalls, and I've never caught myself thinking that I'm going to use my credit card, click 10 buttons, and add all the information that is required. So I think that we need to create a 4th model that will give the possibility to the publishers and to journalists to take the money more quickly from readers and viewers. So we reward quality and not virality, which is what the platforms do. And this is a problem we're working on in Fight Hoax, because this is one of the main problems facing journalism. So if we start from the revenue model, then we can move on to morals and how quality can be given priority over virality. At this point, before before elaborating on this further, please tell us why you chose to deal with this subject. We see a lot of young people, young students going down this path, i.e. combating fake news, as we all know by now, because we keep hearing about fake news. But first of all, Nikos, I would like to say that you should tell us more about the way in which we get information, and not just in Greece, but also what's happening in other countries. We see that this is a global phenomenon.
Small comment. The comment that we had from France with respect to the way that we consume news is very interesting. But I think that this model does not allow the citizens to be responsible in their choices. So I believe that the choice that has to do with the state-centered schemes, where the state will provide the fund through which the citizens will select, does not actually allow the citizens to share in the responsibility and to opt for something else. But with respect to the problems that have actually arisen, I'd like to bring them in certain classifications. So we have more platforms through which we are able to become informed, and we see that there are also other things that pertain to the media. Ownership schemes, the management, the organisation, the commoditization, and we see that this is the very core of the crisis. A third point has to do with journalism per se, and how journalism actually is working. So in order for me to be liked, so that citizens can choose me on the basis of funding from the state, actually showcases the problems that we described before. So I think that if we want to have multiple answers, and if we include issues such as I said that have to do with ownership and which go beyond the mainstream control of a national state, or nation state, sorry, and which are more globalized in nature, and I think it is here that we find the initiative of Google together with the French government, and it gives a percentage to the publishers with respect to the various, or the editors with respect to the various articles that it promotes. Can we also look at the figures, because I think that this is something that will reflect what we're saying. So the figures are the result of the research carried out by the Reuters Institute in Oxford. It was in 2017 and 2016, and it is something that we did together with Reuters. I'm referring to the Department of Journalism. So what are the sources? So the greatest amount or number of people chooses, in fact, the internet. 66% actually is still fixed on TV. We see radio is 30%, social media 69%. And we see here another figure which has to do with the devices used for news. Computers have, in fact, the greatest share, and it is the device used to accessing news, And I would like to actually see also mobile journalism, the use of smartphones. And I think that our mobile phone is, in fact, the main platform through which we actually read the news. And I think this is something that is going to become mainstream. So let's see another figure. This is from research carried out in 2016. How do we look for news in the internet? It is done predominantly through the social networks. And of course, this has to do with the trust that we show towards the social media. And we do so because we actually attach great trust to our own friends and family who filter the news for us. So we see that this trust actually goes through the social media And we see that the social media is, in fact, the first point that they actually get their information online directly from the websites, 44%, and you see that the others have the other points. The other points have a smaller percentage. But what is most interesting here is the interjection is that Greece is in fact the country that ranks top in trusting or placing its trust in social media. And we see that the main source of news are the apps and the websites that provide news, and then we have social media, and then television. And we see that the press has lost a lot of ground as a source of information. Now, the trusting news. So we see that it's not that we do not trust the mass media, but rather we don't really place our trust in the way that journalism is actually functioning. So we see that in Greece, together with the US, we have the lowest levels of trust towards the news, as this was seen in 2016, and the highest percentage is seen in the Nordic countries. And this actually reflects the trust that they have towards the state and community. 20% in Greece shows that we have, in fact, a break in the relationships of trust, and that means that we have seen this also in the fact that there is the belief that the church and the military will, in fact, help remedy this. Now, trust to journalists. We see that 11% of Greeks actually trust journalists. And I think this is reasonable when we know that from the 90s up to 2017, the mainstream motto is that the journalists are sly rascals. And this actually shows why we have actually such low levels of trust. So we also have a share of the blame because we actually allowed this negative model to prevail rather than the positive model of news. However, it is positive that the citizens still show interest, even though we have important investigative journalist shows playing after midnight, and we still have also independent schemes, and they seem to gain ground, and that's of interest. And we see that Greece, together with the US, have in fact the lowest trust placed in the mass media. What does this mean? That the trust towards somebody who's in control is waning. So it shows that the mass media no longer have the power that they should have had, and we see that it is part of the problem and not the answer. So it's not by chance that President Trump has, in fact, throughout the run-up to the elections, invested in detracting from the mass media, because he knew that this would unlock part of his electoral success, and he actually succeeded in this. So he managed to do the following. He managed to, in fact, make the mass media lose prestige, and that was a loss of control. And we see this in the Berlusconi and the Trump administration also. And we see that we have the perception of the independence of the mass media from unfair political influence in selected countries. So we see that the Greeks actually no longer believe the mainstream media, but one never actually thinks how the alternative blogs might not be independent. So we know that the mainstream mass media might be swayed or influenced, but what about the alternative sources of information and their independence? Is it by chance that when the mainstream media lost their prestige in the States, that we had, in fact, the increasing sway of broadband? And is it by chance that the citizens in Greece actually look to the XYZ log spot without actually looking to check its credibility? Thus, we come to this very interesting figure, which was mentioned by Kostas. It's from the Pew Research Center. It's a US research center, and it shows that the low trust placed in the mass media goes hand in hand with the low trust towards the government and the various state institutions. So if somebody believes that by decreasing the prestige of the mass media, they have nothing to lose, they are wrong. We see that this actually shakes the entire structure of the state, and I hope that we will not see similar results to what we have actually seen in the US. Now, before we pursue this point further, and before we have any of the other speakers actually take the floor, but we see that there is this great turn towards the internet, and this is spearheaded by the social media. And it actually has to do with the fact that we seem to opt for more independent news, but it seems that we've gone from a larger bubble to a smaller bubble because we haven't actually chosen greater independence in actual fact. But something that we actually said, but it's been left, in fact, a bit aside. The mainstream media on the internet, perhaps there could be a more comprehensive on the internet, and perhaps we should talk about where the mass media should invest. And I'm not talking about the traditional medium of the news or in the commodity, but how many times do they actually fall in the trap? Certain people don't believe it's a trap. It's one of the main concerns, especially in TV, and I'm looking to you towards Sophia, but I want the view of each and every one of you, because perhaps the newspaper might not go for this, but there might be the issue of promoting and communicating their work through the social media, so that we can also see there the profiles which are being built by the various TV shows, journalists, each and everyone who has, in fact, their own work to show in terms of journalism. Sophia, I believe that for a certain reason that I haven't fully understood, the mainstream media owners have not really entered into social media as much as they should. I consider it impressive. With those that I've come into contact, I said, well, opt for this, it's the future. A friend of mine who publishes a newspaper, I asked him, why in these times do you actually sell newspapers? And he answered, well, the newspapers are the ones that shape the opinion leaders in Greece. Okay, if he says so. Well, I think that was what I was getting at mostly. We see that perhaps a journalist, with great difficulty, but let's take an example which is more of an imaginary one. A journalist has all the tools that they need in TV, where the cost is greater. They have money, they have freedom and the people to do the work. And they actually put together a program which is not aired after midnight, but they also opt to actually push it through the social media also. We see that people who were not so much into journalism but more into entertainment, but still have a presence in TV, opt to promoting it through the internet in the hope of going viral. Well, I don't have any illusions, and I have no illusions with respect to television. Television is, in fact, a medium for entertainment. The fact that we can actually globally gone towards infotainment is, in fact, a necessary evil, because everybody depends on ratings, and ratings are connected to advertising. And those of us who are, in fact, into infotainment, you might have put together a lot of research, and you might have, in fact, spent 3 hours daily for each minute aired on TV, and it might have very low ratings, and you might do something that's simple, which might be lighter, and for this to score very high. And I've actually seen this time and again personally, and although I'm pleased with the ratings, I'm not pleased that this is a phenomenon. But I'd like to say that social media have a great might, and I would like to actually illustrate this with a point which I have seen recently, especially when I went to and saw the Post, which showed how the Pentagon Papers in the States had, in fact, published certain findings with respect to the Vietnam War, and the whole movie was about whether they were going to be published by the New York Times, and then they were published by the Washington Post. At the end of the movie, and we see this story with respect to Washington Post, and it alludes to Watergate. But we should think that in those times, the Pentagon Papers were published. Then we had the Vietnam War come to an end in 4 years, and then after Watergate, Nixon fell in 2 years. And we know now with the tweeting, things happen immediately. And we see that that would have, in fact, brought a war to an end, or they would have brought Nixon to his knees much earlier. Otherwise, Nixon would have gone and said, fake news, fake news. But I think we should look at fake news because we have to put things in order. It is a phenomenon that has to be tackled, and globally people are trying to do so. I would like to keep that in mind. I'd like to attach an asterisk here because I think we should actually open up the issue of fake news. But Kostas, you wanted to add something. Well, I went and saw the Post last night. Okay, I didn't really like it. I liked, in fact, the nature of the movie, but we see that Meryl Streep said at the end that that journalism has to serve the people who are governed, not those who are governing. But I don't think it's not a tweet that will do the work for the Pentagon Papers and Paradise Papers, etc. And I'd like to come to the ICAGA, and this is the International Collaboration of Journalists. It's one of the many that we have in investigative journalism. And I'd like to say that we need to have the collaboration of a lot of people who are investigative journalists, developers, data analysts, and this is one of the things that we did when we were fellows in Colombia. And in order to do this, we need a lot of money and time. And we can come back to the issue of sustainability. Well, I'd like to add this. You said that the Panama Papers, in fact, gave rise to the Iceland Prime Minister stepping down immediately. But it needed a lot of time in order to produce the results it did. But I'd like to say that every day we can find in the Greek press and Greek media thousands of cases of fake news. What about what happened today? I opened my mobile phone this morning, I synced it, and I saw that there was, in fact, a specific newspaper that talked about the Philex sculpture falling in the Paleophalliro. And when you call that when you call the mayor or the police, you found out that it was, in fact, not the wind that brought down the sculpture, but it was, in fact, certain right-wing elements. So it was also a case with the homicide of Phisas, and it was said the next day that he was killed because of football. And we know that this was actually heard. And we know that the journalists do not have the same responsibility as those who are the anchors in the news. But we talk about what Panos Kamenos has done in terms of missiles, but we don't talk about the war in Yemen. So it's not only the fake news and hoaxes, it's also the news that we produce, or the false panic that we might actually spread when we talk about these HIV positive people, and whether we cover a point or not. And I'd like to remind you of various cases. So when there was only publicity given to the heroin load of a ship, and only for micropolitical reasons, and whether somebody actually talked about it or not. The fact that there was a criminal ring and that it was financed by somebody that people have not actually gone to prison over, it doesn't seem to be of interest to anybody. What Costa says is very interesting, and I don't think it is the owners and businessmen. It has to do with the education and training of the journalists, and before actually publishing something, you have to make certain calls.
I hear a lot of information every day, but I have to validate, to verify my source. I have to make some phone calls. Otherwise, I wouldn't present the news. I think that they said that the wind toppled over the sculpture Phalanx, but it's good that we find out that this wasn't true. The thing is, the question is whether they're going to put the sculpture back in its place. According to the artist, it's going to go back where it was. And Kostas talked about the dangerous times we are actually going back to. There are a lot of questions we've received, and I think we should all get engaged in this discussion. And anybody who'd like to intervene can do so. But there's a question that comes to mind. Since we all say that we're being bombarded with information, photos, videos of people who were there at the right place at the right time, holding a mobile phone, and whether this is actually journalism or not, and this is a question posed by Kostas, there's also this issue of credibility of the different sites and generally of the internet. And I'd like to combine this with a question that was sent to us by one of the people who are watching us. And I'd like to couple it with another question. Why is the main news of the day the one that will become viral? It will become a trend either on the social media or elsewhere. So the question is addressed to you first, Valentinos, and then Ari. So something that goes viral on social media, and this is something we discussed earlier, maybe going viral on Facebook or spreading through Google. Well, I think this is a very interesting question. I believe that we are at a time where anyone, practically anyone, can generate material, be it a 15-year-old, 20-year-old, or an experienced journalist. So anybody can produce news with very little money and with just some available time to make something go viral, something that they themselves roll. So I think that the platforms are to blame for what's happening to a large extent. The way in which Twitter is structured, it doesn't give the reader time to think. You have an update, you're trying to read the headline, all of a sudden there's a new update, everything's running, there's a quick change happening. So you have to quickly adjust to the trend that everything's running, everything's flowing, there's a constant flow. You have to try and get as much as you can. You don't have time to think. And there's a research by Reuters. 81% of the respondents in the survey said that they just read the headline, the title, and not the article, the content. So there are people creating opinions in this way, just by reading headlines. So the platforms have a big burden on their shoulders. They actually reward engagement, virality, how many will press the like button, how many will share, how many will comment. These are not measured by means of quality. So virality is rewarded and not quality. In order for me to preempt some questions, who determines what's quality and what's not of high quality? So we're going back to where we started regarding dependencies and being dependent on politicians or businessmen. So I think that platforms need to give control, absolute control to the users. I don't want Facebook to tell me that I want to see more posts from my dad, my friend, from whoever. I want to be able to be the judge of that and to have absolute control without spending hours pressing unlike or unfollow buttons. So another, if you like, way to protect ourselves against misinformation and this bombardment of information, this has to start from the large platforms, be it from the EU or other regulators. I think that the users have to have absolute control. It has to be given back to the final user, the end user. This is the first step that has to be taken immediately. Aris, I fully agree that platforms are the center of our discussion. This is where we need to focus on. And I talked about the monopoly character of platforms, which we cannot challenge, meaning that by nature, such a platform will be a monopoly, and there will be the owners of Google or Facebook, just a handful of people who will actually control the flow of information. The question is not whether there will be a monopoly or not, because it is a monopoly. The question is how this monopoly will be controlled. And we go back to square one, i.e. when the news is considered a commodity, in which case virality is number one, then a private company cannot solve this riddle, meaning a private company that is not democratically controlled by the citizens. I'm not talking about countries, I'm not talking about states. I read an article saying that we should nationalize Facebook, meaning socialize it, because we can't nationalize it, because then which nation would have it under its control? And I know that this may sound very radical to talk about the nationalization or socialization of such a platform, but the system we live in always wanted its infrastructure to be under some kind of social control or citizen control. For example, in the UK, the roads are not privatized. They don't belong to private businessmen because it's an integral part of a society. So it's kept under state control. And this is something that we need to look at, meaning who have we allowed to have control of platforms? And here we're talking about fake news as well. In the case of fake news, we see an intervention which reminds me of McCarthyism and the witch hunt in the US, and this was in previous decades. So what we see is the owners of Facebook or Google saying that we will intervene, that we will tamper this algorithm with political criteria. For example, in order for us not to have such a huge propagation of Russian news. And this is a decision that's been taken at other levels. For example, they actually took away the credentials for the Russian journalists in the American Congress, the US Congress. And this leads to dystopias, to very bad situations. Assange just the other day made an announcement saying that there's an existential problem facing our societies because of the power that these platforms wage. Nikos, would you like to say something in relation to the question that was posed and also in relation to the more general discussion? Let me just cite an example. It's very typical of the way in which communication has changed, communication in the public sphere. For the first time, so the question, for example, is the following. Google and the mass media are determining the main subject of discussion. But for the first time now, we see that the US president has direct contact with the audience. He defines the agenda and doesn't follow the agenda. This has never happened before. This unmediated communication and exchange, which forces the mass media to follow and to try and deal with this campaign by President Trump using traditional means, for example, focusing on scandals of the past, which of course have no impact now on American society. Now, fake news. And actually, President Trump gave awards out for fake news. So we must understand that this is a politicized concept, i.e. fake news. It's politicized. And I agree with the fact that we should not carry out a witch hunt. We should try to avoid it. Sophia, so my question is addressed to you. So let's leave Facebook and Twitter aside for a moment. And if we actually observe what's happening on the internet, which is our responsibility or other people's responsibility, and I'm talking about the current situation. So we see that mainstream media do not seem to seriously invest in the internet. That's the one thing. And on the other hand, we see that they try to remain active, and we see that the conditions are getting worse and worse. They're worsening, and this makes people even more suspicious as to why some mainstream media should continue to exist even though they're not doing well. So why should they continue to soldier on? So the question is, what kind of product do we want the mainstream media to produce, given the fact that they don't invest in investigative journalism and in the possibility in having some basic tools, not just to pick up a phone, because this is the responsibility of us all to make one phone call and a second phone call in order to cross-check the information you got from the first phone call, but also in order to be able to cover the news and to report it, because it's now a luxury to investigate it in depth, but at least we need to report it properly. So in relation to your first question as to why media barons continue to invest in television, we see that 250, 260 from advertising, while the lion's share goes to TV channels. And this, of course, will change, provided there are good proposals on the internet and mobile journalism. So we're talking about internet and Facebook, and we see that 15-year-olds, they don't even deal with Facebook anymore. They're into Snapchat and only mobile. So I think that gradually Facebook will lose its significance, and I think that this is great news for people who want to be creative on the internet and who want to move forward on the internet. So surely things will change. But we know that TV is not just news, it's mainly entertainment. So this reminds me of my editor-in-chief. And when we really like a TV show, the ratings are very poor because we've really enjoyed ourselves in this TV show. Our conscience is clear, but it's not what sells. It's not what people like to watch at that time of the day. So I believe that what all media do, news media do on the internet, is to try and have some serious news, and they know that serious news are necessary in a news site, but of course they need to also have all the other stuff that goes viral. And I've talked to people who own sites, and I think that some people have realized that the future is to have serious news on the sites, and fortunately for us, they also want to invest in serious journalism. So I want you, from your own background, to tell me, what's the responsibility of the audience, of the public? What's our responsibility when we are viewers? And what about the way we choose to receive information, be it a radio station or a TV show? So what I keep saying, and I think we haven't looked at this well and we haven't interpreted correctly, is we keep talking about the audience using the definition of previous years, of the 1950s. There's not just one audience. There are different audiences with different access platforms and different preferences. The main access platform, the main device is mobile, but Facebook, as mentioned by Sophia, and contrary to a myth, Facebook is mainly used by my generation, people from the age of 45 and up. So here we see that the use of Facebook is mainly by 45-year-olds and above, and the greatest impact of Facebook is on people who are over the age of 55. They've discovered a new world, a brave new world. So we're not talking about people who haven't got specific preferences, set preferences. So we can't use a propaganda model saying that there is one source, one receiver, and so on and so forth. So there are many different models as media outlets. I think we need to realize this, and as journalists too. So we need to realize that there isn't one size fits all. There are different sources and different models. I keep looking at the questions. We've received many questions at SNF/questions. And I think that this has to do with a question I asked previously, quality of journalism that's being produced. Has this got to do with the educational background of the citizens? If they have a poor education, does this have to do with the progress of the country? Is it like a vicious circle, so to speak? Can you hear me now? Yes. I think that this is a bit of a cliche. Wherever we go at the end, somebody says we lack the education, and it's as if we're saying it with disdain, that I am educated, whereas the others aren't. So, contrary to the dystopian situation that we have described, I still believe that there is room for investigative quality journalism, and it's got nothing to do with the medium, the platform being Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, and the different audiences. So media changed. We had the printing press, we had Gutenberg, we had the television. Things will change. They keep changing all the time. So in Colombia and in New York, it's good to talk about tools, it's good to have programs, all this is good, it's fine, but the basics of journalism are the ones that we have to come back to. I read a very interesting article in Guardian by the editor-in-chief. Guardian is changing its format, it's changing, and it had a very interesting article where there were 5 important things regarding journalists. It says, develop ideas which help people get better, which help them improve. It's not enough to criticize. You have to criticize, but you have to work with the readers. You have to work with them in order to have a bigger impact, a bigger effect. Forget your class background. You have to move away from your class background, and also go away from your favorite colors. Move away, meaning we buy the newspaper that represents us because there we'll read what we like and what we prefer. This is normally the case. Make a bigger audience. Catherine Vinner said that. She wrote the article. So broaden your horizons and your sources in order for what you write to be more meaningful, to have meaning to a multiple audience, not just one audience. And in order for you to be able to cover everything, to be all-encompassing. I thought this was very inspiring. It is very inspiring. And I'm also going to say something which is rather provocative. So what leeway does a journalist, a young journalist, have? Do they have any room for maneuver? So I think it would be absurd if somebody had 100% freedom and the possibility to change, not to pick a model that he would like. I'd just like to give you a figure. figure, 800,000. Those are the Guardian subscribers. I brought it down to the Greek level. I scaled it down. But Guardian is not doing well. It has a viability problem. And Kostas said something, and I'm going to repeat that. I think we have to go back to the basics of journalism. We had a copy-paste model which became dominant. They thought that journalism means that I go to my office, I sit down, I surf the internet, and I just copy-paste what I find on the internet while surfing. I think that journalism needs to find outlets, and it will find outlets if we understand that we know that if there is a 100-meter race, we will see that the media actually have lost this race. I think we need to give meaning to signify what is happening, and this is how we manage to get up again. What is the impact of what is being published? Why should I actually listen to the news? Why should I listen to the same piece of news at 10, 12, 2, and so on and so forth? Why do we have this reproduction of the same thing over and over again? I think we need to link what we're hearing to the overall effect that it may have. And this is what the article in Guardian touched on. And I think that there are some pluses, but there are a lot of minuses. There are many cons and a few pros, but we see that there is a big demand, and we know that there's a high unemployment rate among journalists, and working conditions are very difficult, particularly those that have been recently employed. So the working conditions are very bad. They work under harsh conditions. Sometimes they're not insured the way they should be. However, more and more people decide to become journalists. They pick the profession of journalist. And you know this, there are many schools of journalism, and we know that there is this outcry against journalists, but this doesn't stop people from wanting to study journalism. So I'd like to hear from the audience, from the people in the front row, the first SNF fellows. They came back from the summer study at Columbia School of Journalism. You went there last summer. There are 3 programs there, 18 in total. Kostas is one of the SNF fellows in investigative journalism. There are 2 more programs, analysis of statistical data. Why in Greece we don't have statistical data, or the use of multimedia. Maria Sidiropoulou, in the video we watched, said that there's this bombardment of information, and the question is, how can we, despite this bombardment, raise awareness among the audience in order for them to read my story? So Maria, would you like to go first?
Tell us about the prospects and through your own experience when you attended the program. Practically speaking, what do you do with this experience, and how do you put it to good use? Are there these prospects? I have to stand up, okay. That's why I like to be behind the camera. I don't feel very comfortable in the spotlight. Now, I'd like to speak from my personal experience. I'm amongst the very fortunate of my year because I graduated from Pandion University. I had a lot of other students, fellow students, who were better, but I actually did a lot of internships for free, and I was, in fact, allowed to work in TV. And I must say that I also worked with Sophia. And I managed to enter into this world, which has its pros and cons, but is still magical. But I must say that I was very interested in video. I liked images, and I always thought it was a magical tool that you could really seize people's interests and to help them travel and to help them see the news with their own eyes. So through Columbia and this scholarship, I was able to see how things actually shaped up in practice, because in the program we were given a camera and we were told, okay, go outside. They told us 3 or 4 main things, and I had the opportunity to see what it means to shape the news from a practical point of view, from the narrative structure of the story, and so forth. And when I came back here, because I continued to work in an investigative program that, of course, is aired at 1 o'clock at night, I see that this has helped me greatly, and that now I'm able to give, in fact, a younger touch to what we see in videos, and to actually give a younger touch to how we process the visual aspects. Now, we see that it is now cheaper to produce video than before, so a young graduate can, with a DSLR, go out and produce a video and propose it, or to actually create a channel on YouTube and acquire an audience. But of course, this must be always whilst remaining faithful to the principles of journalism. Thankfully, the internet gives us a lot of room to express ourselves as journalists. But of course, this means that the person must be interested in promoting video and will want to strive to succeed. They will not be able to earn money, of course, but they will actually put together a portfolio and be seen, and for other media to see their work. But video in Greece, now as we speak, is a difficult medium. I don't want to actually say differently, because it's very difficult to earn your bread this way. We know that Nicolia has actually graduated from Columbia, the postgraduate studies, and she's a one-woman show, and she actually creates videos for foreign media everywhere, and thankfully young people everywhere speak English, so please tell us about your work. Okay, she is taking her revenge upon me because she was in fact in my video, but this is something that we put together with Aris. We're freelancers, and we look for different media and clients in Greece and abroad, and we do this in order to survive. But I'd like to add something to the discussion. And what is, in fact, of essence here is quality. And we have to focus on that, because we have fake news very often aired on television. We see this also in the newspapers. So why should somebody buy the newspaper when they will discover that it has, in fact, fake news? In 2011, 2012, when we had a lot of people protesting on the streets, we had, in fact, 500, 600 people on the streets, and then they went back to their home, they switched on the TV, and they saw something different. They saw, in fact, something different from what they'd seen with their own eyes, about the violence, about what people had been protesting about. So TV lost its credibility. If I could interject, of course, Valentinos, I have spoken with quite a few fellows from Colombia, and I've worked with Dimitris Bokas many times this year. I must say, says Anna, and you'll permit me to say that Dimitris was to be with us, but we're very pleased to say that he couldn't be with us, because Dimitris has in fact remained in New York, and he has continued, and he's watching us online, and we'd like to wish him not only our greetings, but we'd like to send him our strength, so that as to egg him on, because we see that he was a young person who's very engaged, and I think that last year in the press conference with Mrs. Yin, that we'd made the first presentation of the Columbia program, and we had the Vice Dean, Janine Jacquet, that we saw also in the video, and at the time we'd received the first questions as to the process, and we know that the procedure is more more or less well known. And the meet was here, and he'd approached us afterwards. He'd put certain questions, so he was accepted finally. He was one of the 18, and he managed to continue. And we are very pleased to hear his news from New York and Bloomberg. I must say that he was truly amazing. We worked together with him on misinformation, and this was together with Harvard University. And I must say that these are the people that we need in data journalism, in investigative journalism, and we need people who have self-confidence. Let me revert to what you said. We see, in fact, more and more young people going towards journalism and studying journalism. And I think that there is a lot of appetite for this. I don't think we should look at the numbers, but we should look at quality. I'm 20 years old, and I know a lot of people in my own circle who are from 16 up to 19 years of age, and they have their own blogs, and they actually air their own thoughts. But as we were speaking, I just received a quote of Dimitri, and he says that professors and teachers of young people are not those who were in the classrooms, but they're the ones that are actually in the TV shows and channels, and these are the ones followed by millions. And I'm afraid that a lot of people actually fall into the trap of this trend because they see a glamour that my name will be heard, I'll have thousands of viewers, I'll have fans. So I think we should disregard the numbers and look at quality. This is, in fact, very difficult when you're a professor of journalism in a major university, because it's very difficult to see how you can, in fact, improve quality over quantity. It's not simply to have a blog that one reads at home, but how we can be creative and qualitative. Now, with respect to what you say, and along those lines, I would like to hear one of the scholars from investigative journalism. We've already heard Kostas, but in line with what you said, and Nicolia also echoed your thoughts, and you want to attach importance on quality. But the question that I would like to put is the same. How does one survive in this environment when one acquires not only such specialized information, but also when one has to learn how to use certain tools that have a more widespread use? Is there any of the fellows who'd like to take the floor?
So, good evening. Can you hear me? I will dwell on something that you said previously. You said that the problem of quality journalism has to do with the lack of training and education of journalists. This is not always true. Okay, some of us went to Columbia. We didn't stay there for long, but we actually got to know about some very useful tools, and we could include them in our daily work in order to improve the quality of our work. But when you work in feed and you have 15 minutes to produce a text, many of you may have worked in feed, and you have 1 hour to produce 4 texts, 15 minutes per text. You can't actually unravel your talent. There's very limited time. And of course, you don't earn a lot. The remuneration is low. I actually found an ad in the classifieds, and the editor-in-chief told me that this is useless. New people need to come in. They don't do a good job. So this was €250. Well, it's not that much, but it's not too bad either. So I think it went well. And so training and education of journalists. Well, there are very good new journalists, but they've never been given the possibility to really work. And I also know some young journalists who have 2 jobs. They teach, they actually tutor kids, and I speak based on experience. So they have to do different jobs in order to survive, odd jobs sometimes. And the thing is whether your job is enough for you to live on, whether you get enough in order to make ends meet, and also how much freedom are you given by the media you work for. And this actually is linked to the final quality of the deliverable. Thank you very much, Elvira Kritheri. Now, would anybody else like to take the floor? Somebody who attended the investigative journalism workshop at Columbia. Fotis, could you share your experience with us? It was an amazing experience. It was awesome. We were able to speak to some gurus, to people we consider very important in investigative journalism. Can you hear me now? So I'm saying that we had the possibility to meet with people who are considered authorities on the matter. For example, they have received Pulitzer Awards. There was a gentleman, Bogdanitz, he had won the Pulitzer Prize, and he made us think of the basic principles of journalism. Speak closer to the microphone, please, because we can't hear you. So we asked him a very simple question. How do you find what to report? How will you actually find a Pulitzer winning piece of news? Do you read about it? Does somebody phone you and tell you? Let me just give you an example. There was a food scare, a food scandal somewhere at a school canteen. Some children had bought some product and they fell sick. And everybody said some kids fell sick because of what they bought at the school canteen. But this person went to find out what caused the problem. He actually went to China and saw what the problem was, and because he investigated the matter further and found the root causes, he was able to win the Pulitzer Prize. Sometimes some things are given, and I think that we need to go back to the basics. I had a wonderful time last July at Columbia, and we saw that there was something happening, and they were actually shooting for the poster. There was Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. I watched the movie just the other day, and I loved it. I saw it with Kostas. And it reminded me of something we've all forgotten, that there were times that people went out, they went to the streets and they applauded in favor of journalists and newspapers. They actually gave them a standing ovation and they cheered them on. And now this is not happening. Actually, the reverse is happening, because it doesn't matter what you say to the people. What's important is why you say it. So think about it for a minute. So you see that somebody gives you a piece of news. Haven't you wondered, why is this person saying it now? Who's put him up to it? Who's making him say it to me? So sometimes investigation is considered to be guided in our mind. And this is because of the dependence that exists between power and journalists, between the people who are financially powerful and those who are politically powerful. And let me tell you something about the children now. If we go back to the basics of journalism, what we need to do is for children to look at the number one enemy of journalism. This is self-censorship, meaning the possibility to have the news, but to compromise and start thinking, why should I say it? It might cause problems, and maybe I shouldn't say it after all. So young journalists should understand that they have to face up to the editor-in-chief, but they also have to come face-to-face with their own conscience sometime during their career. Thank you very much, Fotis. So from the LEAD program, can we hear somebody who attended the LEAD program? Sotiris, please. So good evening. From me, I'm the only one here from the LEAD program. Unfortunately, we spent 3 months in New York. Oh, we have these two gentlemen also, these two people in the back. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. So there are more people who attended the LEAD program. The very good thing about the LEAD program is that for a journalist who has been traditionally trained and who works with traditional tools, it's very interesting now that he has in his arsenal new tools, tools that he's never used before. And these tools and techniques will not replace in any way video, reporting, traditional means of carrying out journalism. But I believe that these new tools may be complementary. All these ways of producing a piece of news can work in harmony with one another in order for us to have an in-depth analysis of news. Would anybody else like to take the floor? One of the other people that attended the lead program, can we hear from you? Microphone, please. Katerina, I can't see you. You're in the back. Here I am. I'm standing. Sorry I was late. I was busy, and I got caught up in traffic. So come stand here in the front so that everybody can see you, or you can stand here next to me. No, it's fine. Hello there. Hello. I was together with Christos and Sotiris. We went to the Leeds program at Columbia. This is the longest program. We spent 4 months, almost 4 months there, and almost none of us, with the exception of Dimitris Bokas, who stayed in America, knew nothing about data journalism, coding, and processing of big data. So what we actually got out of this program is that our lives changed forever. We were traditional journalists when we went to Columbia, and now that we've come back, we are digital journalists, data journalists, and coders. And in Kathimerini newspaper, they refer to us as hackers as well. So what I'd like to say is that what we propose is a new type of journalism that is based on traditional journalism, but in a scientific way. What we do is we look again at the data and we try to find the truth. We seek the truth. And even if the journalist doesn't tell you the truth for some reason or another, or because an editor-in-chief or somebody higher up in the hierarchy doesn't want the truth to come out, data journalism gives you the data. It allows you to analyze things so that you can see things for yourselves. So this is not a ready product for the reader. We show the reader the way to find the truth through the data and the analysis we've carried out that he himself can do, because everything's open. So what I suggest is the following. If you're not afraid to learn new things, and if you really want to deal with coding, because in Columbia, this is a tough program. It's a very rigorous program. So if you want to go a step further, or 2 or 3 steps further, just like Dimitris, who decided to stay on and learn more. So go to the site, look at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, what is available. We were given a lot of support from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, and you can go for the most difficult program, lead, multimedia, investigative. So I ask those of you who are interested to go and find a way to change your life like our lives changed. Thank you, Katerina. I'd like to remind those of you who don't know that there is no age criterion. Anybody is eligible. Anybody can apply. There is no age restriction or cap. There's a special form, application form that must be filled out. It's available. You can find all the information on snf.org. That's our site. There you can find analytical information on each of the 3 available programs. And there's a link to the pages of Columbia, the Columbia site. And there you will find all the necessary information that you have to fill out. And you'll also get all the details about each program of the 3. So Columbia Media at snf.org. This is where we can give you answers, and we can also ask the people from Columbia if you have any questions that you'd like to ask them, and we can come back to you with the answers. So applications are open. It opened on January 1st. So here they accept the applications, which of course is under the Stavros Niarchos Scholarship Program. It will remain open up until the 1st of March. That's the deadline. So I'd like to come back to the discussion. There are many questions that have been posed, so I'm just trying to group these questions if I can. Some of the matters have already been discussed. So first of all, the question is, and this is a quick question, is the theory confirmed that no news, good news? This is something that a lot of people have done. People have stopped watching the news on TV. They've stopped reading. They feel better that way. They say that all this news makes me sick. I don't trust anybody. So maybe I shouldn't be informed. Maybe I shouldn't watch the news. I'm going to give my TV for recycling and so on and so forth. So isn't this something we see happening? I'd like to add to what was mentioned previously by the SNF Fellows. I work at the Aristotle University at the School of Journalism. Data journalism and data mining are offered as courses for 2-3 years now by the university, and I'm happy that we see eye to eye on this with Columbia. Of course, we don't have the same buildings, the facilities are not the same, but we have a peace journalism lab, which is unique. We have data mining for 2 years now. It's not advertising. I'm not advertising the department. I'm just very proud of what we do at our department. Off microphone, off mic.
Well, we need to defend the public university. I think that as people tend to have a negative image about it, one has to remember that there are, in fact, certain exceptions to the rule, and that's very important. But I'd like to say, with respect to the distance people actually have from news, I think that they distance themselves from specific platforms, but they keep themselves informed in one way or another. I think people can't be that introspective. I think the main difference that we see is that in the past we used to seek out information, so we had, in fact, this dependence on the mass media. Now we are, in fact, floating on an ocean of information. So something that Valentinos also said before, we need to train also the public, and this means that we need to invest in the education of mass media and journalism. There was an initiative in the past, but we have brought it back this year also, and we've created for the first time the World Week, which is in fact focusing on media literacy in Greece. And I think that this is something that is going to help us tackle the need to navigate through this ocean of information. Now, a question that we have through the internet, and which has to do with something that we've heard in a meeting of ours, and it's something that I'd like to put before we have your questions, if you have questions or positions, and whether this is something that in fact undermines democracy, and this brings us a full circle, and whether this loss of trust in the institutions is something that undermines the quality of democracy with respect to the quality of public debate. Whoever wants can take the question, of course. Well, of course it undermines democracy when journalism finds itself at such a level. In New York, if we heard something in the investigational program, was that the essence of journalism is to serve the public interest. It's something that was heard also in the Post, and it is there to actually serve the governed, and it is to control the government for public interest. So when we are at that point, there is an issue of democracy. Now, I'd like to add something to the previous discussion. The Greek National University doesn't and I'm referring to the National Technical University and the university, has nothing remiss. In Greece, they tend to say that if you go abroad, you'll get the tools abroad, and you'll come back and you'll be at a very good level. But I think one can very well find the tools by themselves. Of course, if you have the infrastructure that Columbia has, you might do a better job, but a lot of the tools already exist. And we know that a lot of people who will graduate from journalism go to various advertising firms, but they cannot survive in the field. They want to enter the field, says Anna. So I'd like to say that we have to keep in mind that there's no lack of knowledge in the Greek university. There's no lack of good professors, even though there is a great effort made to undermine it by the mass media also. So we can do certain things abroad to advance more, but I think what is most important is the model that produces news. Okay, I went and did investigative journalism, and I'd like to talk about another professor there who had 2 or 3 Pulitzers to his name, which is indicative. Okay, he was a dean of the university, and he had actually published a book on ExxonMobil, you know, the oil industry. And there was, in fact, a 35-year-old like myself, and the dean had, in fact, told him that he needed to check the reporting. He had given him his agenda and said, take it. Sisyphus came to me and said, look, do take this. It's, in fact, the work I've done for the last year and a half or so. Make the phone calls again, recheck everything, and we'll have an editor actually check it through. And, you know, I don't know if the... and then the book was published. So there was the time, the money, and the know-how. And this led to a Pulitzer Prize. Now, you come back from Columbia, and that's where the problems start. It's not when you're at Columbia, it's when you return to Greece and what you do afterwards. So, says the moderator, what do you prefer to do? Limit the knowledge that you receive? No. I prefer to go, acquire the experience, inspire myself, and see that there's another type of journalism also. But I think that you know that you get to meet other people from abroad, and you know that, say, the journalists from Switzerland, from France, from Canada, who get paid for their work, and they do amazing things. And I think that it's very important to have a network, and a lot of the investigations are cross-border. You need other people's help because a lot of things actually cross borders. So it's very important to get out and meet people. I'm saying that for the students here. Sophia, I continue to believe that journalism is, in fact, a magical profession. That's why students opt for it. And it's something that you have to be passionate about. You have to be in love with it. And I believe that the salaries are, in fact, too low. And I don't consider it a bad thing that has to do a lot of jobs at once. We've all done this, but I believe that the kids that come back from Columbia, well, I was lucky enough to go to NYU and do postgraduate studies there and to experience what you experienced yourselves. And I believe that we have to actually have people come from abroad with ideas, but to look outwardly also. And I think that when you come into contact with Columbia abroad, it's not only the classes, but it's the whole world that opens up for you. And I think it's very important to see whether you can do work and sell it abroad. I'm not certain that we have all the means here. I believe that we have to develop the way that universities taught in universities, and practically speaking, to do practical courses on video. And I would like to actually close by referring to the post. We've talked about it time and again here, but I think that often I believe that I've actually to do a lot of things in my life, but we know that a lot of journalists are on the payroll, but this is not, in fact, the case always, because that things are not so bleak. We shouldn't believe that there is a conspiracy theory where people actually dictate how you should do your work. But of course, it is a job that needs a lot of work. You need to go at it with gusto, and you need to make full use of what you've learnt at Columbia. Now, back to the Post. The publisher of the Washington Post, Catherine Graham, that's played by Meryl Streep. So when I actually feel low, I try to read 2 or 3 books that uplift me. And we must say that this lady had said something that motivates me on a daily basis, and I want to continue to do this world. I don't actually believe that we have identical roles because she was a publisher, but I will... and she had her mother say, become a journalist, Katie, just for the experience of doing whatever you're passionate about on a day-to-day basis, so that you'll be able to investigate it and to make it. So be a newspaper woman, Katie, if only for the excuse of pursuing any object you want. So that passion is very important, and that's the motive for all the journalists. I want to feel optimistic that those people who graduate from Columbia and any other university will be able to have, in fact, a life in journalism.
I remember my first days when I started working for Sky Radio in 95, 96, and then the radio producer said to me, leave, it's the worst job in the world. And the editor-in-chief wanted to open up a tavern on the island of Andros. This was the first few minutes I came in touch with the people on Sky Radio. I didn't follow their advice. I didn't do what they did. I think it's a magical profession, and it's addictive. It's like a drug from a certain moment onwards, meaning you can't actually stop working as a journalist. It's like taking a drug. And I think that you are being judged, actually, by whether you have the guts of an Assange or Snowden, who say that I can spend the rest of my life cooped up in a room because I have some information I want to leak to the public. You must always remember that if at a certain point in time you start making money off journalism, there's something you're probably not doing right, and then you have to reconsider the way you work. It's an expensive hobby that you may be able to abandon at a certain point in time and to survive. And on the basis of all the above, I don't know, we also heard that sometimes we are a bit dystopian. I think that the important thing is to move forward, to move on, fall flat on your face once, twice, because it's a wonderful profession. Thank you very much, Aris. Valentinos is here. We lost you for a couple of minutes, but now the connection has been restored. Are there any questions? Any questions from the people here in the audience? Any questions you'd like to ask? Just a minute so that the mic can be brought to you. We talked quite a few times, and we also looked at the statistics. We said that Greeks, because I'm going to dwell on the Greeks, I'm not going to talk about other countries, do not trust journalists. I'm 20 years old, and in the last 3 years, I've been dealing with journalism. We saw that at the time of the referendum, actually before the results of the referendum came out, there were people who were committed. They had a cause. They were dedicated. Radio stations, TV channels, newspapers who were in favor of yes or no. They were biased. And when the results came out and the people saw the propaganda in favor of yes or no in the referendum, people changed their minds for some reason, one reason or another. So how can these people actually regain the trust of the people? So what do we expect to happen after such a shock, meaning people coming out and saying that we believe that there will be yes, people will say yes in the referendum, yes will win over no, and that actually wasn't the case. The outcome was completely different. It was the exact opposite. So my question is, why should you take a stance in favor of yes or no? As a journalist, of course, people don't agree. There are different views on this, but this is my view, my catch on this. And let's also hear from Nikos, from Mr. Panagiotou, but also let's ask journalists who were working in different media at the time. You don't listen to me. I think we're too far away. We see things differently today. We're not on the same wavelengths, Kostas. So regaining trust. Well, I think this means practicing journalism differently. It means exercising self-criticism as a journalist. It also means including trolls and the propaganda that also took place via the internet. I've heard a lot about mainstream media. I've seen very few things happening outside the mainstream media, meaning how journalists in mainstream media regain the trust of the readers and the viewers by making use of technological means they have at their disposal, but by showing that what they produce are of value and not just copy-paste of news or stories that I find in foreign media. That's my view. Kostas, in answer to your question, I don't think that there is such a thing as objective journalism, and there shouldn't be such a thing. I think there is honorable journalism, clean and independent journalism, but I don't think it is wrong for the journalists at a second level to express their views and their preferences, but they should let the public be the first judge. And of course, they can take a stand, because we know that people talk about neutrality in journalism. There is no such thing. You present the facts and the event, and then depending on your ideological beliefs and political affiliations, you may have a certain opinion. And I think this, what happened in the referendum to what happened in the US elections with the election of Trump, well, there are some similarities here. The answer to your question is that we can't actually say that all journalists are the same. And this, of course, is connected to instructions and orders given by publishers and editors, meaning you can't say that all journalists are equally bad, that they're all the same. And that's not true. And sometimes when you hear journalists, you only think about those on television. But there are other journalists and those who are behind those who are anchormen on television. And just because somebody made an incorrect statement that all citizens are in favor of yes in the referendum, of course, he wouldn't have said that everybody's in favor of no. And of course, you can't identify all journalists to the journalists that I just mentioned. And sometimes, for example, we hear about surgeons who accept bribes or a kickback. But this doesn't mean that we should generalize that all surgeons are corrupt. And just because one man beats his wife doesn't mean that all men beat their wives. So we can't actually consider all journalists the same. Please wait for the microphone, because we'd like to hear you loud and clear.
Well, you said before that in Greece the journalism is not, in fact, is not dependent. No, I'd like to actually take that back. When somebody pays you, you're on the payroll, of course, but it's up to the ethics of each and every one of us to see what type of journalism you produce. We see that the way that the news are produced and the mass media are financed, by definition, creates these phenomena. So somebody might not actually tell you, you won't do this, or you won't actually do the other, but you know from your own back that you can't do it. I mean, you know that if you're in Mega and you actually have a program on Swiss banks, there might be a phone call or two made, but you might actually see the program aired in the past, in the actual fact, because the trailer was shown. Now, the dependence that the media have on the people that work there, the journalists. So how do we actually, how are we able to improve journalism? So that means that journalists can only do so much, even though they might be educated and trained and try to espouse the quality. So I think that's a red line. So it's the medium that rules, and it will set the rules. And either you want to compromise with these, or you'll be outside of the rules. Now, permit me to interject. I understand what you're getting at, but I think that it's too much of a generalization. Every day in each newsroom, we see that there is, in fact, fight waged, as we saw in the film we talked about, whether you're going to go to press or not. And we see sometimes things go through, other times they don't. So that's not, in fact, something that we know from the outset. There's always personal responsibility and personal ethos and contribution. I think we cannot consider that things are always the same. But it's not simply an issue of personal responsibility or personal know-how or the ethics that I might have, because if I'm in an environment that does not permit me to express these in one way or another, I will go about self-limitation or self-censorship. It's what we talked about before, and I think you both broached it, Kostas and Sofia. So we know that we've exceeded the time allotted. I'm trying to actually handle the tens of questions we received electronically. Shall we take one more question, perhaps? And then perhaps we can go on and have the discussion off mic with a glass of wine. That would be better. Okay, we take the one final question. Please wait for the mic. Well, I wanted to ask with respect to something that you said in the beginning. It has to do with who signs off, because, you know, in the new media, there is a lot of unauthored text, and it's something that concerns me greatly. And there's a lack of a name. We don't know who is the author, and that's something that troubles me. So I don't know if one of the colleagues would like to respond, unless you were addressing the question to somebody specifically. Well, I think it's self-evident that this is very dangerous indeed. And it shouldn't be done. That goes without saying. But we also know that certain journalists decide not to sign the real name, and we know that they use an alias. And thank you for this very interesting discussion. I think that these are points that concern us all, or most of us at least, so we'll continue with a glass of wine. And we are going to meet again in the next edition of the Dialogues in February. Thank you.